Billionaire CEO betrayed pregnant wife for mistress, but the twist shattered the internet. Ma'am, he's just a homeless drifter. Why risk everything for someone like him? Julia looked up from the steaming bowl of soup she was placing in front of the man, her voice steady but trembling. Because someone once saved me when I was worth even less. She had no idea that the man on her couch wasn't a beggar. He was David Allanar, the CEO of Allanar Technologies, once on the cover of Forbes, now unrecognizable in rags. And he had come, not to beg, but to test the last thing he believed in: human kindness. The alley behind Granger Street Deli smelled of grease, rain, and forgotten lives. Julia Myers tightened her scarf as she stepped out the back door with a trash bag in one hand and her lunch in the other. The cold November wind bit at her cheeks, but something else froze her in place. A man crawled near the dumpster, thin, barefoot, face hidden beneath a hood, and she should have turned away. She had before. This wasn't her first time seeing the forgotten drift through this part of town. But today, something in her heart broke open. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't even moving. Julia stepped closer, her nurse instincts kicking in. "Sir," she said gently, kneeling beside him. A groan, barely audible, his hands were shaking. Without another thought, she laid down her lunch beside him. Hot chicken soup, her grandmother's recipe, the only warmth she had to offer. She said softly, "Please." The man lifted his face and Julia flinched, not out of fear, out of shock. His eyes, piercing gray beneath matted hair, eyes that once knew power, command, maybe even love. But they were tired now, hollow, as if life had taken everything and left him here. "Why?" he croaked, voice hoarse. "Because nobody deserves to be forgotten," Julia replied, standing. And she walked away, not knowing her one act of kindness had just changed her entire future. 2 days later. But she found him again. Same spot, same posture, only this time there was blood. A cut above his eyebrow, a bruise forming at his temple. "Who did this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Does it matter?" he rasped. "People like me don't get to ask questions." Julia bit her lip. She had $124.00 in her bank account, overdue utility bills, and a night shift waiting for her. But she also had a one-bedroom apartment, and a heart that refused to look away. "I can't leave you here," she said. And just like that, she brought a total stranger into her home. Her neighbors gawked. Her co-worker Melissa scolded her. "You're a single woman, Jules. What if he's dangerous? What if he's a con?" But Julia only smiled, gently placing a warm towel on the man's forehead. "Maybe he is," she said. "But I'd rather be wrong about hope than right about fear." She didn't ask his name, and he didn't offer it. He slept on her couch, ate from her hands, and watched her with quiet eyes. In her tiny apartment, she lit candles not for romance, but because the power kept flickering. He noticed the cracked photo frame on her nightstand, an old picture of a man in military uniform, arms wrapped around a younger Julia. "My brother," she murmured when she saw him staring. "He died in Afghanistan. He used to say, 'Kindness is the last rebellion in a cruel world.' I guess I never let that go." The man said nothing, but that night, when she wasn't looking, he fixed the hinge on her front door, quietly, skillfully. Too skillfully. 10 days later. He spoke. "My name is David," he said one evening, his voice lower, more certain. Julia looked up from the dishes. "David," she repeated. "That's a strong name." He chuckled under his breath. "Used to be." And slowly, a bond began to form. She told him about the night her fiancé left her at the altar, about the miscarriage that followed, about how she rebuilt herself with prayers, night shifts, and her grandmother's recipes. He listened. And one night she asked, "What about you, David? What did you do before all this?" There was a long pause. He stared into the flickering candlelight. "I built things," he said at last. "Things that didn't last. And Julia, sensing the ache behind those words, said nothing more. But David was not who he seemed. Because 2 miles away, in a luxury penthouse gathering dust, sat a black leather briefcase. Inside, a stack of untouched letters, a company ID, and a newspaper clipping from 6 months ago. Allanar vanishes after Boardroom Cup. Insider suspects betrayal. Family denies mental health rumors. He hadn't just walked away from his life. He had been erased, pushed out, by people he trusted, by blood. And now, here, in Julia's warmth and worn-out couch, he was testing something. Could love be real without wealth? Would someone see him, not as a CEO, not as a millionaire, but as a man? And if she could, would he ever have the courage to tell her the truth? But fate moves faster than secrets. And one night, Julia found the letter that would unravel everything. A letter, with her name on it, and written 18 years ago. Signed, Given Allanar. Session 1. The letter, the lie, and the man on the couch. The clock ticked past 2:03 a.m., but sleep was nowhere near Julia Myers. She stood frozen in the dim glow of the kitchen, a crumpled envelope clutched in her hand, her breath shallow. The rest of the world, her quiet house, her snoring dog, the man sleeping on her couch, had gone still. But inside her chest, something cracked open. It had started with the simplest thing, cleaning out the old tea tin in her grandmother's cupboard, looking for chamomile. Instead, she found an envelope yellowed with age, tucked flat between recipes and brittle photographs. She might have missed it entirely if it hadn't slipped free and fluttered to the floor. It was addressed in careful cursive. Julia Myers, for the day you deserve the truth. D. She turned the envelope over in her hands. She knew those initials. She remembered them. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She tore it open. The letter dated October 17, 2007. Julianne? If you're reading this, then either I'm too much of a coward to say it out loud, or I'm already gone. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I didn't walk away because I didn't care. I walked away because I didn't know how to stay. There was a girl once, the kind of girl you never forget. She had fire in her voice and grace in her silence. I let her go before I ever got to see what kind of mother she'd become. I made a mistake that I've paid for in ways you can't imagine. This letter finds you, and you've ever wondered why he didn't show up, or who your father really was. Know this. I loved you both. I just didn't know how to be a man back then. David. Julia reread it 3 times before her knees gave out and she sank to the floor, her back pressed against the cabinet. Her father. Her father had written this. David A. There was only one person in her life right now with that name. One man who'd stumbled into her alley 6 months ago looking half dead and soaking wet, and somehow became the steady, quiet heartbeat of her home. David. No last name. No questions. No answers. He'd fixed her roof. He'd taught her son how to ride a bike. He'd made her laugh again after years of silence. But never once had he told her about his past. The man on the couch. Julia stood and stepped quietly into the living room. There he was, David, curled beneath a faded quilt, the same one her grandmother had made. His stubble had grown in gray at the edges. The scar beneath his jaw caught the moonlight. He looked peaceful, like he belonged. Her mind raced. Could this really be the same man from the letter? The man who left her mother alone and pregnant at 20? She clutched the envelope tighter. David stirred. Jules, he said softly, his voice still tangled in sleep. What's wrong? Julia forced a small smile. Nothing, just couldn't sleep. He sat up. Want some tea? Now, you rest. He tilted his head, studying her. You're shaking. I'm fine, she lied, and walked back to the kitchen. The doubt creeps in. And she barely slept that night. The next morning, while David cleaned the gutters and hummed an old Van Morrison song, Julia drove across town to the county library, letter in hand. Her best friend, Nora Patterson, worked in archives and genealogy. If anyone could trace a name, it was Nora. "Okay, I'm not asking too many questions," Nora said, sipping from a chipped mug. "But this letter, it's real, old, and whoever wrote it, they mailed it from New York. Manhattan." Julia's heart stopped. "Manhattan?" Nora nodded. "Upper West Side, wealthy district. Mailroom code comes from a corporate office tower." A corporate office. Julia's head spun. She thought about the quiet way David avoided questions, the precision in the way he folded his laundry, the way he flinched every time someone mentioned Wall Street or the tech bubble. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. But what if he had been? The call that confirmed it. That night, when David went out to walk the dog, Julia opened his worn backpack. She hated herself for doing it. Inside, she found a photo, old, faded, of a younger David in a tuxedo with a woman Julia recognized as her mother, barely older than 20. A wristwatch, gold, inscribed on the back, "To DA with all my time, SC." And finally, a badge. Of David Allanar, founder and CEO. Allanar Tech Group. Julia couldn't breathe. She sank to her knees. The man sleeping under her roof was not a drifter. He was the man her mother once waited for. The man who never showed up. Her father. And he never told her. When David returned, he found her sitting at the table, the letter beside her. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "I weren't planning to tell me," she whispered. "Then why the hell did you come back into my life?" David froze. "I didn't know you'd forgive me enough to let me stay." And too, the truth he never dared say. The silence between them could have shattered glass. David stood by the door, his coat still dripping from the cold night air. Julia sat frozen at the kitchen table, her fingers brushing the envelope, the letter, the photo, the badge. Proof. He didn't even try to deny it. "So it's true," she said, barely above a whisper. "You're him. You're David Allanar." David slowly took off his coat and hung it on the chair like it was just any other night, like her entire life hadn't just detonated. "I was," he said, "a long time ago." Julia pushed back her chair. "You let me believe you were homeless? You let my son call you Uncle Dave? You sat at my dinner table? For 6 months?" David's jaw tightened. "I never asked to be taken in." "Why you didn't stop me?" she snapped. "You didn't stop anything." He finally met her eyes. "Because I didn't know you were my daughter. Not at first." New York, 2005, the day everything broke. David sat behind a desk that touched the Manhattan skyline, drowning in numbers and silence. His world was empire-sized, but cold. His fiancée had walked out weeks earlier. His company was bleeding after a betrayal by his closest friend, and his own mother, the only person who could still humble him, had died the day before. He was 39, wealthy, alone, utterly hollow. The last thing he expected that night was a letter. She had a baby. She named her Julia. It was unsigned, no return address. She never told you because she knew you'd choose power over love. David had read it 100 times, and he'd burned it. He had convinced himself it was a lie. Until 20 years later, a woman with auburn eyes and his mother's quiet stubbornness handed him soup behind a gas station in Ohio. Back to present, Julia's kitchen, midnight. "You're telling me you didn't know?" Julia asked, voice shaking. David nodded. "Not at first. But the more time I spent here, the more I saw her in you, your mother, Sarah God." He closed his eyes. "I thought I'd come here to die quietly. Instead, I found you." Julia stood, pacing. "You should have told me the moment you knew. You owed me that." David's voice cracked. "I didn't think I had the right." The box under the floorboards. Julia turned and disappeared down the hallway. She came back carrying a small wooden box, her mother's keepsake trunk. Inside was a photograph. David and Sarah at a wedding, laughing. Sarah looked like sunlight in human form. Next to it, a baby blanket, pale blue, embroidered with the letter J. And beneath it all, a birth certificate. Julia Grace Myers. Father unknown. Julia slammed it down. She waited. For years, I asked her once why I didn't have a dad. You know what she said? David's hands trembled. What? She said, your father is out there, sweetheart, but sometimes men aren't strong enough to love and lead at the same time. He blinked, tears catching at the corners of his lashes. She was right. Emotional climax. We had just shown up, Julia said, voice breaking. If you had knocked on the door, even once, I would have had a father. David fell into the chair like a man hit by lightning. All those years of boardrooms and broken deals, press headlines and power plays, none of it had prepared him for this kind of loss. The loss of time. I hadn't walked away that night, he whispered. If I'd stayed, maybe none of this would have happened. Julia stared at him. Yeah, you hadn't walked away. I might have loved you. Silence. By now, she whispered, I don't know who you are. The next morning, a broken goodbye. By sunrise, David was gone. The couch was empty, his things neatly packed. The gold watch, his mother's, was left on the table. Beside it, a note. You deserve better than silence and shame. I'm going to make things right. I don't know how, but I will. D.A. Julia didn't cry. Not then. She stared at the watch for a long time. Then she closed her eyes and whispered, why couldn't you just stay? 3 days later, a black town car pulled up outside her small cafe. Inside sat a man in a tailored suit holding a leather file. He asked one question. Are you Julia Grace Myers, legal heir to the Allanar fortune? Mission 3. The inheritance nobody wanted her to find. Morning fog. Outside Julia's cafe. The cafe was barely open when the black town car returned. Julia hadn't touched the watch since he left, hadn't told Ethan a word. She wanted to believe David's letter meant something, but men like that, they vanished. Always did. She was wiping the same counter for the 3rd time when the car door opened. A man in a sharply pressed charcoal suit stepped out, holding a monogrammed leather folder. Julia Grace Myers? He asked, approaching like he already knew the answer. She hesitated. Yeah. I represent the Allanar Trust. May we speak privately? Inside the cafe, a bombshell in an envelope. He introduced himself as Thomas Brentwood, senior legal counsel for the Allanar family estate. Calm, polished, no warmth in his tone, only duty. He slid the folder toward her. Inside, a trust deed, several notarized documents, and her name printed next to beneficiary. For Mr. David Allanar's updated directive, you are now primary heir to the Allanar family trust, Brentwood said. Effective immediately. Julia blinked. We've been some mistake. I'm just a waitress. My mother cleaned houses. We don't belong to any of this. Brentwood adjusted his cufflinks, expression unreadable. It is not a matter of belonging, Miss Mayer. It is a matter of blood. A glimpse into a world she never knew. She flipped through the papers. Townhouse in Charleston. A majority share in Allanar Holdings. Education fund for Ethan. A sealed letter titled, For Julia, when she's ready. She pushed the folder away like it burned. Why now? She whispered. Why not 20 years ago? Brentwood sighed. Then, for the first time, he looked human. Because David Allanar was a brilliant man, but a deeply broken one, and because some people around him never wanted you found. Julia stiffened. What do you mean? Nobody ever told me why everyone is pleased about your existence, Ms. Myers. Least of all, the current acting CEO. 2. Corporate headquarters. Allanar Industries. In a glass tower above New York, Lillian Croft, David's former COO and the interim CEO, was shredding a document. You said he was dead, she hissed at her assistant. We disappeared. We assumed, well, he's not. And now she's in the picture? Lillian paced the office, eyes blazing. That girl has no idea what she's walking into. The board will eat her alive. Do we send someone to persuade her to decline the inheritance? Lillian paused, then smiled coldly. Nay, let her come. Let her walk into the lion's den. Julia's decision, the beginning of a fight. That night, Julia sat alone with the sealed letter in her hands. Ethan was asleep. The cafe was dark. Her fingers shook as she opened the envelope. My dear Julia, I failed you, again and again, but I am trying to build a door, should you ever want to walk through it. Will be people who think you're unworthy, who will try to erase you, like they erased your mother. Don't let them. Your name is Julia Grace Allanar, and it's time they learn what grace really looks like. She wept, quiet, trembling sobs. And then she stood and began to pack a bag. Welcome to Manhattan. Julia stepped off the train in New York City the next morning. Denim jacket, suitcase, heart pounding. Waiting for her at the platform, driver in uniform. And beside him, a woman in sunglasses, arms crossed. Lillian Croft. Miss Myers, she said smoothly, extending a hand. We've been expecting you. Julia didn't blink. Good, because I didn't come to hide. Session 4, the Boardroom of Wolves. Allanar Industries, 63rd floor, executive boardroom. The elevator opened with a soft chime. Julia stepped out, heart hammering in her chest. She wore a navy blouse, clean jeans, and the only pair of heels she owned, scuffed but dignified. Across the glass hallway, the boardroom door loomed. Mahogany, frosted glass, a steel plaque read, Executive Committee, Confidential. Breton walked beside her. We're going to underestimate you, he said quietly. Good, Julia replied. Let them. Inside the lion's den. The room fell silent when she entered. 12 seats, 11 men in suits, 1 woman at the head of the table. Lillian Croft, powder dressed in pearl gray, cold eyes. Her smile was practiced, condescending. Miss Myers, thank you for gracing us with your presence. Julia didn't flinch. I'm here because someone tried to erase mine. A murmur swept the room. One of the older men, Frank Darnell, head of legal, raised an eyebrow. Let's be civil. Miss Myers, we're aware of the late Mr. Allanar's unusual codicil. However, we believe there are questions regarding its legitimacy. You mean you're hoping there are? Brentwood passed copies of the notarized letter across the table. The documents are authenticated. The DNA test confirms her paternity. Mr. Allanar named her sole heir and primary voting trustee. Lillian tapped her manicured nails against the wood. It may be true, legally, but running a $2 billion zero-cents enterprise isn't a matter of blood. It's experience, education, gravitas. Julia locked eyes with her. I didn't come here to run your company. Not yet. I came for answers. A photograph slides across the table. Julia pulled a faded photo from her folder. It showed a young woman, her mother, smiling in a maid's uniform outside a mansion in Virginia. Standing behind her, in the shadows, David Allanar, a hand almost resting on her back. Julia placed the photo face up on the table. Who took this? The room felt quiet. No one spoke. Julia's voice trembled, but she didn't back down. My mother worked for the Allanar family for years. Then one day, she was dismissed without cause, moved states, changed her name. She never told me why, but someone in this room knows. Lillian stood. That's enough. We're not here for ghost stories. We're here for governance. Julia stood too. Then govern this. I'm not going anywhere. I own 51% of the voting rights. So, unless you're voting to remove me, which would be an illegal motion, I'll be attending every board meeting from now on. Brentwood smiled, just slightly. Power isn't always loud. The board was stunned. She wasn't loud, she wasn't polished, but she was clear. "You were hoping I'd be scared," Julia said, voice steady. "You were hoping I'd take a check and disappear. But I'm not here for a payout. I'm here for the truth." Billion's facade cracked, just slightly. "Then be careful what you wish for," she said, voice like ice. Julia's new office, the one that was meant to stay empty. Later that evening, Julia walked into the corner office marked David Allanar, Executive Chair. It had been locked since his disappearance. Brentwood handed her the key. Inside, mahogany shelves, leather-bound ledgers, and on the desk, a single, unopened envelope. It was addressed in David's handwriting. He opened, "If they turn on her." Julia sat down slowly, her hand trembling over the envelope. As the city lights flickered beyond the glass, she whispered to herself, "I think I'm here to inherit his money, but they have no idea I inherited his fight." In Session 5, The Letter and the Labyrinth. David Allanar's former office, midnight. The city outside was quiet, veiled in amber light and distant sirens. Julia sat in the leather chair that had once belonged to her father, a man she had never truly known, yet who had somehow left her the keys to his entire world. She held the envelope, labeled in precise, old-fashioned handwriting. Be opened if they turn on her. Her fingers trembled as she peeled it open. Inside wasn't just a letter. There were 3 things: a handwritten note, a black and white photo, and a small silver key. The letter. "Dearest Julia, if you're reading this, it means they know, and worse, they've underestimated you. Good, they always did the same to me. You were never a mistake, you were my miracle. I couldn't protect your mother the way I should have, and I paid the price for trusting the wrong people. There is a file, hidden in the Langston Vault, Locker 6B. This key will open it. Inside you'll find documents, contracts, bribes, surveillance logs, names, dates, everything they've done to bury the truth about you and about what really happened to me." Julia's breath caught. "You've inherited my shares, but more than that, you've inherited my war. Don't try to fight them head-on. They wear armor made of secrets. You need truth. Find Mason. He's the only one I ever trusted. He disappeared before I could warn him. If he's still alive, he knows where the bodies are buried. And Julia. If I could go back to that night, I would have run with your mother instead of hiding behind legacy. But this is your time now, not to repeat my mistakes, but to rewrite the story." The letter ended with 5 words that hit her like a punch to the chest. "I never stopped loving you." The photograph. Julia turned to the photo tucked in the envelope. It was grainy, but unmistakable. A young Lillian Croft, nearly unrecognizable, standing with 2 men. One was David. The other? Julia's eyes widened. It was Mason Langston. But there was something strange in the photo. A blurred background. A building with a neon sign. And Julia recognized it. Not from life, but from her mother's old journals. That was where her mother was sent after the fall. They told her she was delusional, that David never loved her, that she imagined it all. Julia clutched the photo to her chest. I institutionalized her to shut her up. Langston Vault, 3 days later. With Brentwood's help, Julia tracked down the Langston Vault. It was buried deep in an old bank-turned-private archive center, reserved only for the ultra-wealthy. Locker 6B was at the end of a narrow, and she used the key. A thick file labeled, Project Redwood climbed in Allanar. Brentwood's brow furrowed. Project Redwood was supposed to be a terminated acquisition, something about offshore tax structures. But when Julia flipped the folder open, what spilled out wasn't finance. It was surveillance photos. Of her mother. Of her, as a child. Of David, meeting in secret with someone who looked like a federal agent. And then, the final photo, a man with graying hair bent over a hospital bed. The chart at the bottom read, Patient Mason Langston. Status, induced coma. Julia's knees gave out. They didn't just erase her. They tried to erase everyone who could prove the truth. The battle just got personal. Back in her car, Julia sat in stunned silence. We buried him. They buried the evidence. They buried us. Brentwood looked at her. What are you going to do? She closed the file and said quietly, I'm going to dig them all up. One lie at a time. Mission 6. The Coma, the confession, and the camera feed. Light Sterling Hills Medical Center. The rain whispered down like a warning across the windshield as Julia parked across the street from Sterling Hills, the ultra-profitable medical facility known only to the ultra-rich and the utterly ruined. It didn't look like a hospital. It looked like a fortress. There were no signs, no front desk, no visiting hours. Just mirrored glass, soft perimeter lights, and cameras everywhere. But Julia had something none of them expected. A father's last letter. To name. And a code. Find Mason. He knows where the bodies are buried. The infiltration. Dressed in black, Julia entered with Brentwood posing as a tech contractor from a luxury medical IT firm. Brentwood had called in a favor from his old army buddy who forged their access credentials. Inside, everything smelled of wealth and antiseptic power. A single nurse in sight. I don't care for the living here, Brentwood muttered, eyeing the silent corridors. We just manage the inconvenient. They reached the lower level, restricted neurocare, and stopped at room 12C. The file had said Mason was here. But there was no name on the door. Only a small red light blinking over the number. Julia placed her hand on the scanner. A forged print worked. The lock clicked open. Inside the room. There he was. Mason Langston. Hooked up to machines. Wires trailed from his skull like vines wrapping a forgotten statue. His body was frail, but his jaws still sharp, his fingers still clenched in tension, like even his coma refused to surrender. Julia approached slowly. You knew my father, didn't you? No answer, of course. She knelt beside him, holding his cold hand. The monitor above him spiked. Julia's breath caught. Here's me. Then the overhead lights flickered, and a new sound filled the room. The intercom. A woman's voice, smooth as silk and cold as winter. Miss Myers? We've been expecting you. Julia froze. You're trespassing on federal ground. But more importantly, you've opened a door that can't be closed. Surveillance room, moments later. Brentwood had split off to access the server room. He hacked into the live camera feeds, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Julia's room wasn't just monitored. It was being recorded and streamed to an encrypted external server. And in one of them lay her mother. Not a photo, not a memory. The woman, still alive. Eyes open, but sedated. Kira Myers? Julia, your mother's not dead, he whispered into. She's here. She's been here all along. Escape or revelation? The lights across the facility now turned red. Alarms weren't sounding because no one was supposed to know. But guards were converging. Julia stared at Mason, whose heart monitor beat faster with every second she touched his hand. Tell me, please, what do they want from me? She whispered, tears forming. Be. Suddenly, his hand twitched. Julia gasped. He's waking up. But then, a sharp hiss. The machine surged, and a new IV line began to pump clear fluid into Mason's arm. No, what is that? Julia screamed. She grabbed the IV line and yanked it out. The machine flatlined. Showdown in the hallway. Brentwood appeared at the door just in time. We have to go. Now. They're wiping the entire West Wing. Julia clutched the photo of her mother from the surveillance screenshot. She's alive. They've kept her sedated for 25 years. I know. We'll come back for her, but if we don't make it out of here now, they'll add your name to the list too. Behind them, the hall filled with suited men. One of them carried a tablet showing Julia's face, tagged Threat Level Alpha, terminate on sight. As they fled through the emergency tunnels, Julia whispered, I knew who I was before I ever walked through that door. Brentwood turned to her, voice shaking. Julia, I think they let you in. And I think this. He held up the surveillance photo of her mother sedated in room 17D. Was the bait. Julia's heart dropped. You think they wanted me to find her? I soak. I think they wanted you to trade places. Mission 7. The journal, the journalist, and the Judas clause. Julia's hands were still trembling as she lit the wood stove in the rundown farmhouse Brentwood had secured. Outside, the wind whispered secrets through pine trees. Inside, Julia sat hunched at a dusty table, staring at the photo she had risked her life to steal. Her mother, sedated. Her father, murdered. Langston, alive but silent. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Brentwood tossed her a flannel blanket. You haven't slept since yesterday. Why do you sleep? She said softly, knowing your whole life was a lie. A knock at the door. At 7:03 a.m., someone knocked. Twice, then once, then 3 times. The code. Brentwood went for his gun. But it wasn't a threat. It was Ivy Wren. Once a Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist, now an independent with a price on her head. She stepped in, trench coat soaked, hair wild, clutching a waterproof bag to her chest like a relic. I came for the girl, but I stayed for the story, she smirked. You're Julia Myers, and this, she pulled out a battered leather-bound journal, belonged to your father. The Langston Ledger. The journal smelled of old ink and tobacco. Julia ran her fingers over her father's handwriting. Inside were pages of names, dates, hidden transactions, offshore accounts, and one phrase underlined in red over and over. The Judas clause. Your father knew he was being set up, Ivy explained. This clause was embedded in the Langston Industries shareholder bylaws. What does it do? Julia asked. It transfers emergency controlling interest to a blood relative. But only if the current CEO becomes incapacitated under suspicious conditions. Julia's eyes widened. Mason Langston. Exactly. We didn't fall into a coma. Someone put him there. The bombshell truth? Ivy leaned in. Julia, I believe your father was working with Mason to clean up Langston Industries. They were preparing to expose a massive shadow network. Money laundering, human trials, political bribes, tied to what your father called the Umbrella Men. Did someone beat them to it? Brentwood's voice cut in. No, someone silenced them. He pulled up a classified document Ivy had encrypted, a list of terminated whistleblowers connected. Julia scanned the names. Lab technicians, auditors, and finally her uncle, Lucas Myers, her father's youngest brother. Reported as missing. Never found. He's on here too, she whispered. We've been cleaning house for years, Ivy said. Now that you've surfaced, they'll come for you next. The Judas clause activates. Ivy reached into her coat and pulled out a key card and a sealed envelope. This came from a dead lawyer 3 nights ago. Said it was for you. Julia opened it. A single line in her father's handwriting. I'm gone, and Mason Falls, it's yours now, Jules. Beneath it, a control ID linked to the Judas clause. She wasn't just the daughter of a dead man, and she was now the legal heir to Langston Industries. Brentwood blinked. I think they buried the threat. Why, they just made you the most dangerous woman in the room. A double agent. And suddenly the farmhouse security lights flickered. Brentwood moved to the window, gun raised. I visited her body. Olivia was 10, Olivia knew. No, she whispered, but her face paled. Then why is there a black SUV parked outside with your old agency's plates? Julia grabbed the journal, Ivy the laptop. Brentwood signaled for them to move to the back exit. But then the front door exploded inward. Smoke, footsteps. 2 men in tactical gear entered, and between them, Elliot Crane, Langston Industries' former general counsel, and the man who helped cover up her father's death. But this time, he didn't come to kill. He came to talk. Julia, they're not who you think they are. While if you want to survive, you'll have to decide, right now, who your family really is. Session 8. The deal, the disappearance, and the video that shattered her. Midnight. Safe house in suburban Napa. The farmhouse was no. After the ambush, Julia, Ivy, and Elliot Crane relocated to a discreet townhouse, owned under a shell company Julia's father once used during whistleblower transfers. But not everyone made it out. Where's Brentwood? Julia asked again, her voice sharp. Elliot leaned against the wall, eyes unreadable. We left the moment you activated the Judas clause. No note, no tracker. That's not like him, isn't it? Elliot tilted his head. Why, well, do you really know the man who found you in an alley? The offer. Elliot slid a folder across the table. This is a sealed deposition, recorded by your father 2 days before his death. And a list of offshore accounts, clean ones, set aside for you, for when all this happened. Julia opened the file. Inside was a USB stick. But there was more. Where's a clause in the Langston Charter, Elliot said. It allows the heir to name a temporary proxy CEO for 90 days. Let me guess, Julia said flatly. You want the job? I want justice, Elliot said, then added quietly. I want you to survive long enough to use it. You helped bury my father? I helped stall them, long enough for him to hide that journal, and for Mason to pass you that ID. You expect me to trust you? No, he said. I expect you to decide which betrayal you can live with. Julia stormed out onto the townhouse balcony, anger fogging her breath. Her phone buzzed. Unknown sender. And file. Told truth about Brentwood. She hesitated, then clicked. The screen flickered. It was surveillance footage, time-stamped 4 years ago. A government detention center, somewhere in Arizona. She saw herself. Barely 17, shaking, shackled. Her father had just died. Across from her sat a man in a federal agent's suit. Brentwood. But he didn't look like a friend. He slid a folder across the table. And she has no idea who she is, he said. Let me stay close. I'll handle the rest. Just keep her off the radar until it's too late for her to matter. Julia dropped the phone. Her legs gave way. No, this can't be. Please intervention. Ivy rushed in from the other room, catching Julia seconds before she collapsed. Did you see? Julia couldn't speak. Her face was ash. They picked up the phone and watched the video. Her expression hardened. Planted. They sent him. You lied to me for 6 years. Worse, he guided you, knowing who you really were. Julia grabbed the phone and slammed it into the wall. Shattered screen, shattered trust. He said I saved him. Turns out, he was the one controlling the game all along. The puzzle breaks open. Ivy began tracing the metadata of the video. Whoever sent this knew you'd believe it. But think, Julia, if Brentwood really wanted you dead, why protect you when they found the photo? Why take a bullet back at Sterling Hills? Maybe guilt. Or maybe someone's trying to cut you off from your last ally. Then I need proof. A hidden archive. Jay remembered something. Your father once mentioned a place. The Red Room. An off-grid Langston facility, deep in Nevada. and the real records were kept. You think Brentwood's file is there? I think everything is there. And then we go there. Well, yet, Elliot said, walking in. The board at Langston Industries is already calling an emergency vote. If you don't show up in 48 hours, they'll appoint someone else permanently. Then I'll show up, Julia said. I'll burn their lies to the ground. The box in the wall. As she packed her things, Julia opened the closet and found something odd. A loose panel in the back. Inside was a shoebox wrapped. She peeled it open with trembling fingers. Inside, a silver chain she wore as a child, her father's voice recorder, and a torn photo. Brentwood, holding her as a baby. What is this? On the back of the photo, in her father's faded handwriting. He owes you everything. He saved you before I ever could. Session 9. The Boardroom, the Bloodline, and the Woman with Her Face. Langston Tower, San Francisco, 57th floor, Executive Boardroom. The skyline of San Francisco stretched out behind Julia like a battlefield she was born to reclaim. She adjusted the black blazer Ivy had lent her, tailored sharp, no frills. Beneath it, her father's old pendant rested against her chest. You don't ask power to be returned, Julia whispered to herself. You take it back? The elevator doors opened. Every board member turned toward her. Elliot Crane was already seated at the far end, expression neutral. And at the head of the table sat Victor Langston, her uncle. Julia Myers, he said smoothly. Or should I say, Julia Langston. Finally decided to show your face. I never hid it, you just stopped recognizing what truth looks like. The challenge. You have no legal claim, Victor said. Your father was declared mentally unfit in the final year of his tenure. The documents were notarized. Julia dropped a USB drive onto the polished mahogany. Why this one? This is the final deposition of Nathaniel Langston, time-stamped 2 days before his death, with video, audio, and corroborated records from the safe house vault. The room stirred. Even Elliot raised an eyebrow. Victor smirked. You think a confession matters more than blood? Julia stepped forward, fire in her eyes. We was your brother, and you poisoned everything he built. But that ends today. The interruption. Just then, the glass doors slammed open. 2 security guards flanked a woman in a crimson sheath dress. Tall, immaculate, a face like Julia's, but harder, cold. I'm sorry to interrupt, the woman said, her heels clicking toward the table. Why, I believe I'm the real heir of Nathaniel Langston. Dead silence. Victor leaned back, hands steepled. Gentlemen, he said, meet Julianne Langston. Of Nathaniel, conceived through surrogacy, DNA verified. Julia blinked, frozen. What game is this? The woman turned to Julia and smirked. I know this must be confusing. But I have birth records, medical logs, and... She pulled a folder from her purse. A signed guardianship clause notarized 5 years ago. Julia opened a file. Inside was her own blood test. This is my blood. No, Julianne said sweetly, it's mine. Strange, isn't it, how close we are? The DNA trap. Ivy, watching from the corner, typed furiously on her tablet. She looked up, pale. Julia, they cloned your records. They used your childhood medical database and built a synthetic profile. It's a forgery. She's perfect, legally speaking, Elliot murmured. Unless we find the original DNA records from before Langston Labs was compromised. Victor rose. This is no longer a matter of family feuds. This is corporate succession. And the board has reviewed the documents? Julianne Langston has legal standing. Julia turned toward the members, faces she remembered as a child. She locked eyes with Warren Briggs, the oldest member and her father's friend. You changed my diapers when Mom died, Julia said. And now you'd sell my name to a forged face? He looked away. Julia stand. I don't need you to believe me, Julian said. I need you to understand this. If you crown her, the world will find out. Langston Industries will fall, not because of me, but because truth has a longer memory than you do. I'm not walking away. She turned to Elliot. Initiate the Red Room protocol. We're going to Nevada. That's treason, Victor snapped. Norshin held in her ground. Langston's inheritance. The escape. As she exited the boardroom, security began to close in. And they'll detain you, Ivy hissed. Then they'll have to outrun me. She darted through the glass lobby as alarms blared. Outside, a vintage Camaro screeched to a halt. But Brentwood? Still alive. Still waiting. Get in. She hesitated, just for a breath, then dove inside. Section 10. The Vault, the Letter, and the Legacy Reclaimed. Venata Desert Langston Red Room Vault. 2:03 AM. The wind howled like ghosts over the sand. Under a blood-moon sky, the Camaro skidded to a stop in front of a half-buried bunker. Brentwood hopped out first, gun in waistband, scanning the shadows. Ivy keyed in a 7-digit passcode. The rusted steel door groaned open, revealing a dark stairwell that smelled of concrete, dust, and something ancient. Something untouched by corporate greed. This place was built in the 80s, Ivy whispered. Your father called it the one vault they could never touch. Right inside? Julia asked. The original genetic archive, and his last letter. Inside the Red Room. They descended slowly. The fluorescent lights buzzed to life. Rows of cryochambers, backup servers, and fingerprint-locked drawers stretched into the darkness. Ivy led them to cabinet L13. She placed Julia's hand on the scanner. It blinked green. The drawer slid open. Inside, a glass vial labeled Original DNA Sample, JL. A sealed envelope marked To My Daughter. Julia's hands trembled. She lifted the letter. Her father's handwriting stared back at her, unmistakable, trembling with truth. Oh, dearest Julia. If you're reading this, they've tried to erase you. But you are not an accident. You are not an orphan. You are my daughter, born of love, raised by grace. I entrusted you to the world when I knew they would come for you. Tears slipped down Julia's cheek. I tried to destroy everything I built. But they couldn't destroy you. Because truth lives in blood, but legacy lives in the choices we make. At the bottom of the envelope, a video chip. They slid it into the projector. Her father speaks. On screen, Nathaniel Langston, older, thinner, eyes filled with sorrow. Victor has forged a successor. If she appears, she's not real. They used Julia's childhood blood sample. I tried to destroy the backups, but I failed. So I left this truth here, for her to find. He looked straight into the lens. Julia, if you ever doubt who you are, look no further than your mother's wedding ring. It's in the drawer marked A3, the one thing Victor could never take. The ring, the proof. Julia opened drawer A3. Inside, wrapped in velvet, was her mother's sapphire ring. Hidden beneath the stone, a microfilm of Julia's birth certificate, signed by Nathaniel and her mother, date stamped, witnessed by Warren Briggs, the one board member who had looked away. That's the original, Ivy gasped, the one before Victor's lawyers buried it. Brentwood leaned closer. You just won, sweetheart. The reckoning begins. Julia texted Elliot to drop this at sunrise. Within minutes, the original DNA, the video confession, and the certified birth certificate were uploaded to Langston's public shareholder page. Within an hour, it was trending on every news channel in America. Scene shift, Langston Tower, San Francisco, the morning after. Victor Langston was arrested for fraud, conspiracy, and genetic tampering. Julianne Langston disappeared. Her real name? Mira Stanton, a biotech surrogate model who had been bribed and surgically altered. The board resigned in disgrace. But one man, Warren Briggs, walked into the press conference and held Julia's mother's ring high. This belonged to the real heir. And today, Langston returns to blood, not deceit. 1 month later, Langston Foundation headquarters. Julia restructured the entire empire. She dissolved the old board, launched the Langston Truth Initiative, a legal defense fund for corporate whistleblowers and displaced heirs. She turned the penthouse into a community innovation lab. She hired Ivy as CTO, Brentwood as head of security. And as for Elliot, the rooftop in San Francisco. The city lights shimmered behind them. Elliot handed Julia a small, weathered envelope. "I kept this since the day you left," he said. Inside, a photo of them, teenagers on the beach, arms wrapped around each other, wind in her curls. On the back, "I had never left that night. Maybe everything would have been different." Julia smiled softly. "Maybe, but if you had stayed, I might have never become this woman." He looked into her eyes. "Do we start over?" She reached for his hand. We start forward. Final montage. A homeless shelter with Julia's name carved in brass. Kids reading under a mural of her father's face. A woman on the street stopping Julia to whisper, "Thank you for making people like us seen." And finally, Julia, standing in front of the Langston building. Her voice. "Power means nothing if it's not used to protect." And love. Love means everything when it chooses truth. A woman who rewrote her name. Julia Myers stood not as a survivor, but as a builder. Of truth. Of legacy. Of the kind of love that chooses integrity over bloodlines and redemption over revenge. She was once the girl in the alley. Forgotten, rejected. And now, she was the woman standing on the 77th floor, barefoot, her heart full, watching a city that once turned its back on her now stand to its feet, because of her. And yet she never saw herself as a queen. "I'm not the rightful heir because I have a name," she once whispered to a child at the shelter. "I'm the rightful heir because I never stopped believing in people." She didn't take revenge. She took responsibility. She didn't reclaim an empire. She rebuilt it, from the soul up. And love? Love didn't come wrapped in diamonds or inheritances. It came when Elliot whispered under starlight. "If today was our first day, I'd still choose you, knowing everything." And she replied, "Then let's make tomorrow our second." Your worth isn't determined by your name, it's revealed by your resilience. Julia wasn't born into power, she grew into it. Every scar she carried became a part of her crown. Truth has a longer memory than money. No matter how deep it was buried, the truth came roaring back, not with vengeance, but with clarity. Real legacy is what you give to those who can't repay you. From funding shelters to restoring justice, Julia proved that the most powerful people are the ones who remember the powerless. Love can be lost, but it is never wasted. Elliot and Julia's story wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And sometimes, love doesn't return the way you expect, it returns stronger. Sometimes, the alley you were left in becomes the place you rise from. Pain doesn't define you. What you do with it does. This story made you believe again, in second chances, in quiet strength, on the kind of love that waits, weathers, and returns. Like this video to honor every woman who's ever had to start over. Compliment below. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from nothing? We want to hear your strength. Share this story with a sister, a friend, or a daughter, because someone you love might need this reminder. You are not forgotten. You are not erased. You are becoming someone unforgettable.